Belle after she's married and has children. And he says, he's making a reference to a poem that talks about 40 children behaving as one, and he's like, yeah, this was every child behaving like 40.
Okay. Right. I need you guys to go stay over there while we talk.
You can stay over there, or you can go into my office, which is through that door right there. You can do either one. If the light's on in there, if the light's not on in there.
Go in there and be in the creepy light of the exit sign.
All right.
Okay, so I wanna just start by asking, just interestingly, the book or the movies. I don't know how many movies there are. It is somewhere I read that it is the story that has been made into the most movies of any story. There are more movies of A Christmas Carol than any other story, and I believe that because I can think off the top of my head probably 20 different retellings of it.
You include episodes from TV shows that are spoofing on it too. That's like 10 bazillion of them.
Yeah, they're all over the place. So just think about the story, and the first thing I want to ask is, do you have any Christmas traditions in your family that are the same or very similar to the traditions that are displayed in A Christmas Carol?
Every Christmas, I decide to kick everyone out of their houses, and then I change my mind on Christmas morning and start with life.
And you invite them all back in.
Exactly.
I don't know if this comes on as a tradition necessarily, but this is a way that our family has been affected by this book. We all, at one point or another, say "bah humbug." Right? It's just a common. Everybody does. Come on, don't look at me like that. Everybody says it at least once every Christmas, right? Bah humbug. It's something you always go to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Dallin said it the most this year. He really liked that. He's our 4-year-old. Oh, okay.
So that's one, and it's interesting because I don't know if you guys know Owl City. He has a song, Bah Humbug.
Hilarious song. If you don't know it, you should listen to it. It's very funny. It's all about how hard it is to do Christmas shopping.
Yeah, so he's got a song called Bah Humbug. It's all about how difficult Christmas shopping is and how much he hates Christmas shopping. So Bah Humbug to Christmas because he hates Christmas shopping.
For being a grumpy Christmas shopping song, it's pretty cheerful though.
So one of the reasons I asked that is because one of the titles that Charles Dickens has earned over the years is The Man Who Invented Christmas. So a lot of the traditions that we, as a culture, culturally, that we do at Christmas time come from a lot of the different Charles Dickens stories that he's written, and it seems like some of them can be traced directly back to that, or at least they were popularized by his stories. And so if you think about, if you've ever seen the movies, if you've ever, there are things in the movies that happen that to us seem like this is just normal Christmas, but up until Charles Dickens was writing, they were not necessarily popular Christmas celebration traditions.
I always summon the spirits from hell to teach me life lessons on Christmas. Doesn't everyone?
Well,
I think that's really interesting because if you were to say one thing that we associate the most with Christmas, it would probably be gifts. And gifts are not actually part of Christmas Carol at all. Like it's not. The celebration is about getting together with family and having a meal.
But he's generous. Yeah. Like he gives the boy, a coin for going to get the cookies, and then he donates to the Christmas fund.
That's true, and he gives the turkey to the Cratchits. So he does give things at the end. You're right.
Right. So Scrooge starts to give, even though gift giving is not necessarily a part of the story itself. Scrooge in his transformation becomes a gift giver.
I would say that the first thing I think about with Christmas is a Christmas tree, though. Do they have a Christmas tree in the book?
They do not.
No.
Christmas
See,
trees
they didn't
were-
invent my Christmas.
Christmas trees were brought into England and then America by Queen Victoria, because her husband was a German, and it's a German tradition.
I knew it came from Germany. I just didn't know when.
So, around this time, but there aren't Christmas trees in the book.
No, there aren't. So it's just interesting to me that he has that name. It's always interested me that that's one of the titles that he has kind of
It's a Christmas feeling, right?
over the years garnered. But yeah, I mean, sure. It's just interesting to me. That's why I was wondering. I was asking.
I actually
Any traditions from the books? Obviously, there's the one tradition that most of us follow, at least within our culture, and that is coming home together and gathering as a family to celebrate as a family. And you get that with Bob Cratchit and his oldest daughter coming home from the millinery for Christmas, and the younger kids wanting to surprise him by having the oldest daughter hide so he doesn't know that she's there, and then they're trying to so he comes in the house, and the wife, she's like, where's what's her name? Martha. Where's Martha? And the mother's like, oh, she couldn't make it. And Bob is just mortified. He's like, oh, on Christmas Day? And he's just really sad. And then, of course, Martha comes out because she can't take it. She just can't take seeing her dad sad, so she has to come out and surprise him. But it's that gathering together, I think, is one of the big things that I think Christmas carols shows. And then Fred and his wife. Fred is always inviting Scrooge. You get the idea. Now, we only see the 1 year, but when they're having a celebration, they say, "Why do you invite him?" He says, "That's why I invite him every year." So every year he comes and invites his uncle to come have dinner with him and his wife. So you can see that throughout. Also, when the Ghost of Christmas Present is, and that's one thing in the book that you don't get in the movies. In the book, the Ghost of Christmas Present takes him, has all kinds of time, takes him all over the whole world, and he sees all these people celebrating Christmas. They go out on the ocean, and there's a ship, and they see all the people on the ship celebrating Christmas. They go out to the coal miners and see the coal miners celebrating. But even in all of that, oftentimes you see he brings them to families that have gathered, and even with the coal miners. So you just, that gathering is one thing that he really emphasized. It's coming
Reminds
together.
me of we always watch a movie called The Snowman on Christmas Eve with the Raymond Briggs books, The Snowman. That's one thing. The snowman takes the little boy and they fly to the North Pole to Santa, but they're seeing all the people celebrate along the way on the ocean and their homes. So that's really
Yeah, I'm gonna look that up. Have you ever seen that? I've never heard of it.
David Bowie.
If it has
Some
David Bowie, I have to watch
It's about 20 minutes long.
I always thought the nickname of the father or creator of Christmas came not from like the specific traditions that we have, but from kind of inventing the secular Christmas in a way. Like, there's a part at the beginning where Fred is talking and he says, Christmas is divorced from, God, if you can divorce it from anything from that, is a good time and a time that brings people together, and he gives us this whole speech about it. And then the rest of the book, it has this kind of concept of the heaven and hell, but there's not you have the ghosts instead of being like angels, and you have, you go through all the world, and there's no like going to church or specifically religious stuff. And then, of course, the modern day, we have these kind of two sides to Christmas, where you have the things that are celebrating the religious part of Christmas, but then there's this whole other aspect to the way people celebrate that is kind of like taken from Fred's speech, where it's like it's a time of goodness and caring and bringing people together, kind of divorced from anything else. And so that was what I thought that came from specifically. I don't know if that's true. Was the idea of being kind of the first person to say, well, Christmas even without God is pretty cool.
Let me find that quote.
It's in the beginning when
I
he's
know.
talking to.
So if you're talking to somebody who doesn't believe in Christ, or which is that's what Fred is doing, right?
Yeah.
Fred is a believer. He's a Christian. He believes that Christmas is about Christ. But he's talking to Ebenezer, who does not believe. He's not a believer. And so he's trying to talk to him in a way. He says, I'm going to tell you what Christmas is. For me, it's about Christ, but if you can't accept that, then what else can it be for you? It can be this, right?
This is what Fred says. I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come round, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. So, what Genevieve is saying, and I've heard this claim before, in fact, I was talking,
We were talking about it
earlier,
yeah.
about whether Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol kind of open up to the secularization of Christmas. I feel like he is saying it can't really be apart from the veneration due to its sacred name in origin. And I connect that to the story in the New Testament where Christ says it's the parable of the sheep and the goats, and he divides the people, and he says to the sheep, I was hungry and you fed me, I was naked and you clothed me, I was a stranger and you took me in prison and you visited me, and all these things. And they say, when did we do those things? And he says, inasmuch as you did it unto the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. And so that idea is saying, if we are being charitable, what's this list of things here? Kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant. If we're seeing men and women as fellow passengers to the grave, that we're seeing us all as we're all on the same journey together, that even if you think you're doing that without God, you aren't. You are in the service of Christ. If you celebrate Christmas this way, even if you don't think that you are honoring Christ.
Right, that's what I think. That's what I think Fred is getting at. But he is talking to somebody who's not a believer. And so it is interesting. It's an interesting comment. It is interesting though, Jenny, because like Mom was saying, there are people who think that Charles Dickens is the one who ushered in a secular Christmas celebration.
And I don't think that, even if that's true, I don't think he would have wanted it.
Because as I read the book and as I watch the movies and I follow the story, I just don't see that. I see a very Christian man with very Christian principles.
Sure.
But I can see the point.
There's little sprinklings of references to Christ the whole time, but it is a Christmas story that's not specifically focused.
And I wouldn't have said that he would have wanted or meant that. I would just think that sometimes culture does something with a popular story that the author never could have predicted, and just because of how popular the movie is, and the fact that, or not the movie, the book, and the movies that were made from it, how present it stayed in the culture during the whole time from when he wrote it on, as the culture has shifted from this is a holy day to jingle bells and
Happy
holidays and flashing
It's
lights.
still Merry
and
Christmas, right?
we promise we can celebrate the most important Christian holiday even if we aren't Christians, because it's fun.
But
That
if
kind of
we,
thing.
but I think the reference here though, and the transformation that he took, I mean, can we say that about our culture today? Because so many people are just really focused more on their own coming together, the family, and not looking at helping the others. I mean,
Right.
Christians do, I think. I mean, in general, people attending church do, and in terms of we get gifts for children through cross lines and things like that.
Right.
But,
But isn't it interesting that Charles Dickens chose to use Christmas as his point of change?
yeah, for the
For
transformation.
the transformation. Any day of the year,
Right, could it happen?
Scrooge could have changed.
Right.
But he chose Christmas as that moment when Scrooge could change, because that was the moment that Scrooge could focus on those principles that we just read about, being kind, charitable, forgiving, right? Pleasant.
He
Christmas.
wasn't very pleasant before.
It's because,
He wasn't.
yeah, no, he wasn't. One other thing I just want to mention from culturally that really always struck me until just a couple of years ago, I realized what I was talking about. But in the song, you're singing these Christmas songs. And what song is it that sings that says, telling scary ghost stories?
The most wonderful time of the year.
Yeah. So I always thought, I don't tell scary ghost stories at Christmas time. Why are we singing this? And then I realized, wait a minute. I read A Christmas Carol every single year. I was like, oh, okay. I guess I do tell scary ghost stories.
So this was the first year we read it as a family. And when I told the kids we were gonna read it, Calvin, he's my 8-year-old, he was like, no, I don't wanna read that book, it's boring, and he was moaning and making so much noise, making so much fuss. All I did was open up the book, and I read the first line where it's like, Marley was dead to begin with, and he shut his mouth so fast. And it was like, okay, we're talking about dead people, I'm gonna listen to this story. And he did, and he really liked it, but it was just really funny to see that reaction.
I think if you want to talk about Charles Dickens being the man who invented Christmas, maybe you should say he's the man who invented Christmas stories. Because if you think about the stories we tell at Christmas time, they're basically all a Christmas carol. They're basically all a story of somebody who needs to transform. They're the Grinch who stole Christmas, or It's a Wonderful Life, or I'm trying to think of
well,
others,
it's the
but
same thing,
but there's
right?
a lot of these stories
Same
are really the same thing as A Christmas Carol. There's somebody who needs to be touched by the spirit of Christmas, the spirits, the ghosts of Christmas. They need to be touched by the spirit of Christmas and transform in some way. Almost every Christmas story, even like cheesy Hallmark movie Christmas stories, they're all this story of somebody who is going to be touched by this spirit.
I can think of
And they're
like
gonna
5
be
picture
transformed.
books that line up with what you're thinking.
You can think of 5, you
I
said?
can think of like 5 picture books just off the top of my head that are like the Christmas picture books that are all
Yeah.
just that.
I just listened to A Quiet Little Woman, which I've had for a while and I never read it, but it's Louisa May Alcott's book, and that's another one like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That it is. It's the way we tell Christmas stories is really the Christmas Carol. And my wife and I read a couple of other Christmas stories by Charles Dickens. Wow. He's got some interesting stories. I think my favorite one was The Christmas Goblins.
Christmas Goblin, I didn't read that one, I think that
It was
Oh,
pretty
it's
short.
so funny.
We only read short ones because we didn't have
Yeah,
time.
we read mostly several short ones.
The Christmas Goblins is basically like just the part of Christmas Carol that is the ghost of Christmas yet to come in the graveyard when Scrooge is discovering he's dead. It's
Yeah.
basically like a longer short story with a character who they're like goblin. It's like in Christmas in a cemetery and there are
Yeah.
goblins that are telling him about how he's gonna go to hell, basically. Right? Like,
Yeah.
that's
And then,
basically-
but as they tell him all these stories about what's going to happen to him in hell, and he decides he's going to change and he's not going to go to hell.
So it's much shorter than A Christmas Carol. It was like
It's
as an audio
shorter,
story, like 10
but it's
15 minutes.
hilarious.
It's the abbreviated, what is it called,
That's
the
the
Cliff
original.
Note, the Cliff Notes for.
Yeah.
Scrooge's Cliff Notes.
It was hilarious, but even then, it's the same basic story about how some supernatural power comes and touches this man's life at Christmas time, and he changes as a result and becomes a better person. So, and speaking of that, I wanted to just talk a little bit about Scrooge's transformation. What was the process that Scrooge went through to become the man he is at the end of the book from the man he is at the beginning of the book? What's the process that he follows to get to that point?
Well, I guess the first thing is Marley's ghost, right? That's the first thing.
So that was kind of what made him take a self-inventory, like Marley made him look at himself and realize where he was right now.
Marley functions as a mirror for him, like a
Yeah.
reflection of
He
this is,
shows him himself.
shows him himself. Like, here are these chains, you also have a chain.
He's like, you were-
Here I am, a miserable resident of hell, that's where you're gonna be. That's, he's like, this is, yeah, talking to him about.
If you listen to some of the language he uses, he's like we watched the musical Scrooge the other day. In that one, he says things about like, oh, you're making such a big chain and you're going to wear it. But when you read the book, he says, if I remember correctly, because I just read it the other day, so I should. Pretty sure he says it in a way that sounds like he's saying, you are wearing a chain
Right.
right
Yeah.
now. He says, you are making this, you are wearing it just like I made it and wore it willingly, and now I'm stuck with it.
Yeah.
You know,
So it's
sense
like,
that Scrooge
like
is
he
always-
can't see it.
Yeah,
But
but
it's
it's
there.
already there, and it's just a question of whether or not he has time to get it off before it becomes permanent.
Right.
Which I actually think is important, because Scrooge isn't like, oh, he's just living his fine life until he dies and has to suffer for what he's done. He's already suffering. He's this miserable guy who has no happiness in his life and nothing worth being alive for anyway at this point.
Which is so true that's true for all of us that have not been transformed, right? I mean, before we had our transformation or our salvation, we were miserable. We may
Right.
not have realized it, most of the time we don't. I know when I'm in pain, I don't necessarily realize just how much pain or how much fatigue until there's recovery, right?
Right.
And the pain is gone, I'm like, I was really hurting. Well, I think that's really true about our spiritual lives. We don't realize the pain we're in, the spiritual pain we're in until it's been removed.
I think that's very true.
And then we have the joy that doesn't ever let us return. I mean,
Right.
we do some.
Yeah.
There are good days and bad days, obviously, but.
Oh, that's awesome. I found the quote that Genevieve was talking about. The ghost says, I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. And then he says to Scrooge, would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? That's what it sounds like, present tense,
Right.
you bear yourself.
Right.
It was as full as heavy and long as this It was full as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have labored on it since. It is a ponderous chain. So, yeah, I do think there's a sense that he's saying you are currently under the burden and you're imprisoned by your sins now. Not this is just this is your future.
And then right after that, actually, Scrooge looks down at himself and is expecting to see the chain, but doesn't.
But
Right.
it's interesting, he's showing him, so he's allowing Scrooge to get some idea of this self-inventory, this is who I am. But even then, I love how he says, 7 years ago, you were where I am now. So he's only giving him a glimpse, he can't see all of it because he's so much worse than he was even 7 years ago. But he's giving him a glimpse, this is who you are. So Scrooge is doing this self-inventory with Marley, right?
So he's telling him negative things about himself, but then the ghost of Christmas past takes him to see himself in the
Past so that he can see positive things about himself as well. I think if they only showed him like, boy, you're a terrible person, that's not very good motivation for change.
Yeah. Bringing up the Ghost of Christmas Past makes me think about, and talking about Fred earlier, makes me think about his sister, which we get a glimpse of in the book, and she's, like, all the adaptations I've seen, she's left out of those. But we see this little girl who just loves her brother, loves her big brother, and runs up to him and gives him a hug, and she's lit up to be around him. And so it makes me think that that's part of Fred's attitude towards Scrooge, is that his mother is, you know, probably one of the only people in the world who looked at Scrooge and could look at him with love and with that light. And so that was carried down to Fred, and maybe that's what gives him that that connection to light, was his little sister who was just so happy to see him.
I'm always frustrated that they don't put her in the movie adaptations. They want to spend so long on the romance.
Yeah.
But I always thought his sister was actually probably much more important to Scrooge's actual characterization and what he was supposed to be getting out of the past in a lot of ways, because it gives him that context for the things later. Like when his sister is weak and small, she's a part of this group that is considered the surplus population, right? So that he has her fresh in his mind, this sister who he loved, and then goes into the present and sees Tiny Tim, and he's seeing not just a random child who is sick, but someone who he can kind of relate to. He has this memory that he's shut out that's come back, so he can look at this child and be like, oh, I loved someone like this. This is the birth closest to like my family that can exist.
So the ghost shows him some positives in himself, but I think even more importantly, the ghost shows him the Ghost of Christmas Past shows him who he wants to be. So in a self-inventory, right, you want to identify, number one, who you are, the negatives, that, you know, what am I trying to change? And then you want to identify somebody that you want to be like. Who do I want to be like? I want to change. So he's got two people in the book. You know, I've never seen a movie that does the second person. The first person is Fezziwig. Very clearly he loves Fezziwig and wants to be like Fezziwig. The second person is actually the man who marries Isabel. Because when he sees the kids jumping on him, he sees the young girl, the daughter, and it says, even in the book, it specifically says, he's looked on her and thought, this could have been mine. This girl could have been mine. She could be leaning on my shoulder. She could be coming to me. And so there's clearly this
family life that he could have.
So that the man who married Isabel and Fezziwig are two examples of people that he could be like. And then you've got the example of his sister, who was always frail. It talks about how she was always frail. She was always weak. And then you have and died young. And then you have Tiny Tim, and that's kind of setting up this whole idea that he can recreate for himself, at least to some degree, some of these things that he's been missing. And so you have the.
So he can be an employer who brings joy to his employees. He could be someone who he can take care of a sick and weak person. He can be part of a family with Fred and Fred's wife. So.
And then it also says he becomes as a second father to Tiny Tim. So.
Right. So kind of like with the girl, wishing that he could have had that girl there. He could have Tiny Tim there. He can have that still. So you get this self-inventory, which actually is both the Marley, the Ghost of Marley, and the Ghost of Christmas Past. Those together create this perfect self-inventory, looking at the ugliness of yourself, but then not stopping there, but looking beyond that to the beauty of what you could become. And that's what he gets out of those 2 visits, right? He gets to see his own ugliness, and then he gets to see the possibility of where he could go, what he could become.
I think there's a reminder in there as well, from the Ghost of Christmas Past, of who he, as a younger man, wanted to be. Not just where he can go from where he is today, but that expectation of, as a younger man, I'm going to go in this direction, and then seeing how far off he veered from that path. I think that linking those 2 things is part of what helped him.
And I think he had to have that link to believe that he could become that. I think without that link, he would have just seen Fezziwig and Isabel's family, and it would have just been heart-wrenching. And he would have just felt like, I've lost everything. But the fact that he did have the link to the past, and that he did initially, he was headed in that direction, it gives him hope that hey, that could be who I am. I don't have to not be there. Anything else that you saw in there that kind of helped Scrooge make that, so self-inventory, I think that's a big part of change, being able to make the change that we want to make. Anything else that you saw in there that assisted or where we saw the process of the change that Scrooge went through?
Well, he was humble by the end of the Ghost of Christmas Past. He was emotional. He was, it talks about how he hadn't, I don't know, like there's this idea that he hadn't gotten that emotional, hadn't cried like that in decades. And he was,
His heart's being softened, it's being prepared.
Yeah. Oh, and that's what a self-inventory is for, right? Self-inventory should soften us, soften our hearts, prepare us to make the changes that we need to make. Well, what else does he need besides that self-inventory, that softening of his heart? And it actually goes also to, and what Louis was saying, kind of goes back to, if I want to make a change, I have to answer the question, why? Why? And I do think that through that process, Scrooge is starting to be able to say why he wants to make the change. Why does he want to be?
Well, he didn't want to when Marley comes. He doesn't
Right.
have any desire to change when he first sees the ghost. And I do think that by the end of the visit of the Ghost of Christmas Past, that's when he has begun to have, but that's why he's so emotional, that he actually wants to be a different person at that time. I'm not sure that he's made any changes yet, except for wanting, which is a big one.
Right, having a desire is a big one. When we're making a change, right? Two of the things that we want to do is we want to build confidence, right, in ourselves. We want to be confident, and we want to build belonging. So by the end of the Ghost of Christmas Past, has he identified ways that he could create belonging? Has he identified ways that he could create confidence?
Well, he says a couple of things during that time. I don't know, that's a Ghost of Christmas Present. Doesn't he say when he's watching himself with Fezziwig, and doesn't he say, "Oh, I'm thinking about Bob Cratchit"?
I wish that I had done something more for my clerk.
There's also a part where he's watching some of the children, and he says, there are some carolers, and I should have given them something. You
Yeah,
see him
I think that's in the present.
He's no, that's in the past.
That's when, isn't that when?
I don't remember exactly which part it is, but I'm sure it's in the past, because I remember when I was reading it recently, I was thinking about how it started early, and I remembered it being like, oh, when he's in the past, it's really just looking, and it's kind of all about the past. It's all about him and how he got to this point, and I was a little surprised to be reading it and see that he was already starting to apply it to, kind of his current day, of being like, oh, there are things about this that actually relate back to my current experiences that I could be doing better at. Just a couple of things that he brings up, that being one of them.
So he definitely identifies ways that he could
create some belonging, right? Wanting to help his clerk, wanting to be able to have that same kind of belonging that Fezziwig created.
And there's also a part where it makes some comment when Marley is there about how he has never had emotions like this or something, and kind of makes it sound like he's always been this crotchety old geezer from birth. And then it goes from that into the past, and I almost wondered at first when I was reading it, if like, is this an inconsistency that the narrator says he's never had any good feelings, but then it's showing that in his childhood and his life he did. But I think maybe in a way there's this sense of, it's been so long since he was this, younger person, that he isn't really able to have any empathy for the people around him. And another thing that the past seemed like it
his
did was,
his perceptions have changed from when he was in the past and what he perceived around him to where he is now. And when the ghost takes him to the past, the ghost actually takes him to his past perceptions, not just to the events themselves, but he actually can see them the way he saw them when he was younger.
And the first person he has empathy for is himself. He sees himself as a lonely boy left alone, and he weeps. He weeps for that boy that he was, and that's like his first. He has to have empathy for himself before he can have empathy for other people.
Well, and I think we can see where the self-inventory takes him from when he starts off with the ghost of Marley, and he makes this flippant remark about how there's more gravy than grave about you. He's not ready to believe, he's not going to listen to him, and then at the end of the Ghost of Christmas Past, he's gone through this process where his heart is softened and he's ready. I think he's also ready, like he's prepared now to see Fred in the present with the Ghost of Christmas Present, and I think to continue building that sense of belonging to Fred then too. Like with the Ghost of Christmas Present, it talks about how he's in the room of that party and like shouting out answers to the game and like wanting to be part of that.
Yeah, so there are multiple scenes in the story where he's starting to have a desire to belong, right?
So what do you think is the next step that Scrooge takes?
So as we're going through change, we have a process, right? We have to ask ourselves certain questions to be able to make change. And one of the the questions, we've talked about a couple of them. One is, why should I change? Why should I be different than I am? And the answer to that is
because who you are
to build self-esteem, to build self-worth, and to build and that means building belonging and confidence, right? We've just talked about that. Another question is, what do I need? And the answer is, I need a self-inventory. I need to understand who I am, and I need to have an idea of what I'm trying to become. And we've talked about that. He's been given that gift through this visit from the ghost, Marley's ghost, and then the Ghost of Christmas Past. So the next question that we have to ask.
Could I actually? I have a question.
Oh, please.
So you keep saying belonging and confidence, and we talked about belonging, but Scrooge was already a very sure of himself, crotchety old man. Where is the change in confidence in this, or is there a change in confidence in this?
That's a good question. So is Scrooge really confident?
He had me fooled if not.
He appears confident.
So your confidence, when you talk about what people need, is belonging, and they need self-confidence. Another way to say that might be they need to have a sense of a positive sense of self.
And trust in themselves, a positive sense of self and a trust in yourself to be able to.
He seems pretty satisfied with how he is at the beginning, but once he gets shaken up, then I feel like his confidence in himself is disturbed at that point. So I do think at the beginning he has a certain kind of self-confidence that's like that kind of
I think maybe it's a confidence that's like in temporal things, like he's confident that he can do the things that he's been doing every day and get the results that he's been getting every day. But if you were to go up to him and maybe ask him, what is your standing before the Lord? Are you going to go to heaven? He would, you know, well, I don't think about that. And that's, I think, where maybe confidence needs to come from, is having confidence
It's
in
very
Jesus Christ.
repressed, right? He's repressed to not really, like, he's shut away all of his past. He doesn't think about it at all. He doesn't really think about what kind of a person he is, what will his future state with God
What is
be.
his future,
And, you know,
what is his
whenever
future
anybody
state
brings
with
up
God?
anything morally related around him, anything from Christmas to wanting to give to the charities, he gets like really angry about it. Which, while he does seem confident in terms of he's pretty sure that he's going in the direction he wants to go, that doesn't, the reaction of someone's saying something that doesn't line up with my life choices, I'm going to inform them that I wish everyone would go die with a stake of holly buried through their heart and leave me alone. Doesn't, you know, I feel like if you're really actually confident in your beliefs, then you don't have that same angry pushback reaction, because you don't, only reason to do that is if you're worried that they're going to make you think about it.
Because he's very defensive. You notice that with Scrooge, every time that somebody talks to him, he's very defensive. And a sense of defensiveness is a lack of confidence. I become defensive when I'm feeling attacked and I'm feeling unconfident in my ability to respond. And so I become defensive, to put up and he does that throughout the beginning of the book. He's very defensive. Defensive with his nephew, very defensive with his love in the musical Scrooge when Fred kind of gives his little speech, and then Bob Cratchit says, "Here, here," and then Scrooge looks at him and says, "One more word from you, Cratchit, and you will be celebrating Christmas by losing your position." Because he's so unconfident in his own abilities that all he can do is use the threat of firing his employee when Fred is more eloquent than he is.
And then he tells Fred that he should go into politics because he's stupid enough for it.
So you can see that there's some lack of confidence now, not in business. He's perfectly confident in his business, but that's not the change he wants to make. By the time he's recognized this is the change I want to make, that's where he's lacking confidence. He doesn't feel confident that he can build happy, healthy, lasting relationships.
Doesn't have a positive sense of self-worth.
Right.
In other words,
Yeah, exactly. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To answer your question.
Is that why he likes his money so much? Because he doesn't have any, if you don't have any relationships, but specifically if you don't really have any value in yourself as a person, then it seems like the only thing that you could value is the stuff you have. You know, I'm worthwhile as a person because I am productive and make lots of money. If you don't have anything else, that'd be about all that would be left.
Well, he certainly doesn't use his money to make himself comfortable or happy. He does use it to give himself value.
And
It's
he doesn't
like
even
a-
use it to take care of himself. He lives in a place that's big and drafty and cold, and he eats gruel and doesn't turn up the heat when it's freezing outside.
I think the money is like a tangible measure of his success. Just, you can see I'm a successful businessman because I have money.
Don't you love stuff?
So if we go on from there, with the next one of the other questions we have to ask ourselves is, who can help me change? So who does Scrooge have available to him to help him make the change that he wants to make?
A bunch of ghosts.
Well, the ghosts aren't going to be with him for very long,
Would that be Fred and Bob?
would it?
I don't know.
That's what I'm asking.
I think Fred
Well, Fred's the one who's been coming to him and offering him a chance
Yeah.
every year, and
So I
you know.
definitely say the ghosts are catalysts, but
Right.
if you need somebody who's gonna be your sustained helper and
Right,
sustaining
you
your
need
life,
somebody who's gonna
that's
be
I think Fred
sustaining
is
you,
his biggest-
supporting
Yeah.
you, celebrating with you when you're successful, and being sad with you when you're not. You need somebody that's there to remind you, hey, this is the change you're trying to make, and maybe when you're messing up, that's the person that says, you're kinda messing up.
And Fred could do that to Scrooge because he doesn't take him seriously. Bob takes him too seriously to be able to.
Bob has to take him seriously.
Yeah.
They're
Well,
under the
yeah, he
pressure.
does.
Can't lose his job.
Well, I wonder,
Okay.
cause,
Well, I was gonna say, not having read the book recently, well, I know, I've read it, I've seen the movies, but not recently again. Where does Tiny Tim fit in? Because is he not someone that could be that light, that,
see, I
Look
think
to.
Tiny Tim could be a reminder for him,
Right.
even if Tiny
because of
Tim
that
could be
link to
the one that.
the link to the
Yeah.
past of who Scrooge was, and
So-
then this person that will celebrate, the Tiny Tim will go, yeah, right?
And as Tiny Tim gets well instead of worse, that's a measure to him of his
Another
success.
positive.
Because he
yeah.
sees in the future, if he continues on his current trajectory, Tiny Tim is dead by the next Christmas.
Right.
And so when he reaches the next Christmas and Tiny Tim is alive, that is
So-
a measure of his success. Look, I made a difference. So not only is Tiny Tim a reminder in the sense of that, like, just his personality is that kind of person, but
Right.
what happens to him shows Scrooge his own
A
success.
different measure of success than
So-
the tangible money,
Yeah.
right?
So I think his three people, because usually when I talk about change, there's three people you need. You need somebody that's gonna support you. That's the person that they're not gonna remind you. They're just gonna celebrate with you when you do well, and they'll mourn with you when you're not doing well, but they're not gonna remind you. They're just gonna be there for you. You need somebody who's gonna remind you, that's gonna be there to help you remember this is the change you're trying to make. And you need somebody who's an observer, who's watching your change and occasionally letting you know how you're doing. And I think he's got those three people. I think Fred is actually his supporter. Fred's not gonna remind him. Fred's too happy and jolly and nice. Fred is not a reminder. He'd be a terrible reminder. He would never do it. He would never do his job. He's gonna be a supporter. He's going to celebrate with Scrooge every moment that he can. That's why he tries to do that already. He's trying to be that supporter and helping him change. I think Tiny Tim is his reminder. Tiny Tim is there to remind him of what it is that he's trying to do. And Tiny Tim will be there to continuously remind him. And I actually think Bob is his observer. Bob, his employee, is the one who's watching him and is able to say, and in the beginning he won't be able to because he'd be afraid, but that's okay because that's why he's not a reminder. He's the observer. Scrooge can go to him and say, hey, how are we doing? And Bob can tell him, hey, wow, you made a lot of changes. You let me buy a whole new coal scuttle. Wow, you're doing great. You know, but he's got these three built-in people, and it's amazing to me because the ghosts are set it up that way, right? They set it up. They bring him to the people who are going to be able to help him make that change.
Hey, Dad, I've just thought this. Do the three spirits, would they maybe like each be one that kind of represent one of those people? Because you have
I was
the
just
spirit of
thinking that
Christmas
too.
present is a very kind of jolly, happy
Supportive.
reminder kind of person,
Well-
and the spirit of the Christmas future is very remindery.
I would have said the other way, I would have said the past is a reminder. Your past is a reminder of things. The present is supporting
Is
him.
the supporter.
And the future is just observing him. And the future doesn't speak at all. He does nothing but observe and
Right.
point to him.
So that's a good point.
Point to the
I hadn't actually put that together, but I think that's a really good point, Genevieve, that you do have that in the three ghosts. You have the ghost of Christmas past who's reminding him of the change that he wants to make, showing him.
Remind
This
him
is
of
the
who
person
he
you want to
was.
be like. This is the person you want to be like. This is who you were. This is the path you were on. And if you can go back to that. And then you have the ghost of Christmas present who's really just showing him the celebration, right? Look at how we can all celebrate together. And then you have the ghost of Christmas future who is observing the progress that he's made
and where he's at. So I think that's a really good point, and I think it's kind of amazing. It's always amazing to me when I read literature, and I think, wow, I've come up with this great tool, and then I read Charles Dickens, like, never mind. He came up with it 100, 200 years ago. He had this idea already. I did that with Pride and Prejudice too once. I built myself this tool, and I was like, whoa, look at this. This is amazing. And then I read Pride and Prejudice, like, oh yeah. Jane Austen came up with this hundreds of years ago.
No new ideas and new ideas.
Yeah.
They're all just repurposed.
I
That's
think
right.
really, you just should feel excited when you see your ideas in other things. You see, oh, a confirmation, this was a good idea. I
Right.
see it in Pride.
Oh, I do. I
This
do.
is a good idea. Oh, look.
I
Maybe
do,
I'm
but
on the right track here.
I also need it to humble me sometimes. I need to be humbled, and so reading good literature can really humble me sometimes. So the next question that I usually, when we're talking about change, that we want to ask ourselves is, how will I know that I've changed? And the answer to that is through observation. We can observe by and we've already gone over this, right? Because we talked about Tiny Tim. If he survives to the next Christmas, that's an observation that Scrooge has changed. The ghost again set it up that he can look and observe and see the things that would have been versus the things that are.
And even something small, like he watches the party with Fred and Fred's wife and the other people, and then he goes to the party and he observes himself there. Like that's a change, because he wasn't at the party when he observed it the first time, but now he is at the party.
Yeah, and because it seems, I love that part in the book, and those of you who haven't read the book, I really recommend that you go and read it. In the book, when he goes to Fred's house, at first he's outside Fred's house for a long time.
Yeah.
He doesn't dare to go in. When he finally rings the doorbell, and the maid comes, and she.
So you're talking about at the end, not in the vision of.
Yeah, no, not in the vision. At the very end, and she invites him in, and she invites him to go sit and wait while she goes and gets Fred, and he's like, no, we're family, it's okay. Which I love that, the fact that he says that right off the bat.
Right.
He wants to belong.
Yeah.
And then he kind of peeks his head into the dining room where they're getting ready for the party. He peeks his head in and kind of shyly approaches Fred and asks if it's okay if he comes to the party. And Fred, of course, is just like as delighted as could be. And then Fred's wife happens to be there too. And then Scrooge is just mortified. He's like, I would never have come in and barged in if I knew you were here. And she gets up and welcomes him and hugs him, and just a beautiful scene of that book, where he can already, right from the start, he can see this change. He can observe this change as he humbles himself and puts himself forward in this new way, and how he's accepted by his family. His family wants him to be there, and so it's a really neat. I love that part of the book. Fred is my favorite character in this book. You can't tell. I love Fred.
You probably also may observe that they might make fun of him less at the party when he's there. But I don't know how much that actually means that he's changed as much as it might mean people have some basic manners.
I don't know. Fred might actually make fun of him while he's at the party.
That's true.
Fred is the kind of person who would have a fun time making fun of Scrooge.
It's not a family get-together if someone's not making fun of it.
Anyways, so we can see how the ghosts are preparing him. And then the last question we have to ask ourselves if we want to make this change is, what do I do now? And in order to do that, you have to look at your self-inventory, and you have to see those people you wanted to be like, and you have to do what they would have done. And I think that's one of the things that, again, the ghosts have set it up. He knows what he can do. He can be a better employer. And he starts right at I love at the end of this book when he wanted to get there to the office before Bob.
because he wanted to
The
be
day after
there.
Christmas.
Yeah, the day after Christmas. He wanted to be there when Bob came in late. He was super excited, and he was gonna act all grouchy, you know, and so when Bob comes in and he's like, "You're late," and he was all grouchy about it, and Bob's like, "It is only once a year," and he's like, therefore I'm going to double your salary. And before we do anything else, I want you to go buy another scuttle of coal, and we're gonna talk about how I can help your family. And you see right off that he's starting to make those changes. He's starting to put into effect the things that he saw in Fezziwig, the way Fezziwig would have treated him when he was a clerk. He's now gonna do that for Bob. The way he saw the Isabel's husband, the way he saw him being a father to those children, he's going to be that to Tiny Tim, right? The way he saw that family interacting, he's gonna be that with Fred and his wife. So he's already, by the end of the book, is already making these changes. He's already putting into effect some of these things that he wants to put in. So when we talk about change, he goes through this process. It's a process that I call the change wheel, and that will be that's on my website. The change wheel is already. So if you're a member and you go on, you have access to that. You can see the change wheel on there. And tomorrow I'm going to go ahead and put on a worksheet that you can actually go through and fill out and actually create your own change wheel, just like Scrooge had, where you're identifying what is the change I want to make, why do I want to make the change, when do I want to make the change, what do I need, that self-inventory, how can I, who do I need, identifying the supporter, the reminder, and the observer, how will I know, those measurable, observable, ways to see how your change is happening, and then what can I do now? Those tasks, individual tasks that you need to carry out in order to make that change happen. So that we'll have that worksheet on the website, so you will have access to that. If you're a member, you can get on, find that. It's great. So, does anybody have any other thoughts about the book or the story?
Why Scrooge? Why not Marley? Marley already did this thing, and now he's trying to help, or commanded to, or part of his penance is to help Scrooge. I don't know if it's clear. I have read some of the book, in an audiobook a year or two ago. But what is it for him? What does Marley get out of it? Or is it just pure love for his partner?
Well, that's a good question. That is a good question. Why Scrooge, and why is Marley being able to come to Scrooge? Why is Scrooge getting this opportunity? Why didn't Marley get that opportunity? That's a great question.
Well, Marley says at the beginning that the ghosts are coming because of him making the arrangements. He doesn't say how he did it or what happens, but he says, it basically says, I made this happen. So I think that, Marley does. My guess would be that, Scrooge, it says Scrooge is the only one who actually mourns at Marley's funeral, and even he doesn't mourn that much. And I think there's maybe a sense that Scrooge and Marley were as close to each other when they were alive, when he was alive, as Marley was to anyone. And now that he's dead, he cares a lot more about Scrooge than he ever did when he was alive.
It's interesting
But
when you say that because the ghosts, right? One of the penance that these ghosts are paying, when you read the book, is really interesting, is that they cannot intervene in human affairs. Like when they were alive, they could have, but now they can't, and that's what is torturing them so much. And I love the scene in the book, and I think the Jim Carrey movie actually has this scene in it. But when Marley has him look out the window, and he sees the ghost, and there's the woman down on the street, and she's got a cold baby, and she's freezing on the street, she's holding this baby, and the ghost is just like,
wanting so badly to do something to help her. And it can't intervene.
And it gets really
And
mad at
that is the
Scrooge.
torture. That is the torture that these ghosts are experiencing. And so Marley being able to intervene on behalf of Scrooge, that would be, even for Marley, that's a gift.
It's
to
making
be able
me
to intervene.
think of that scripture story of, what's the name? I keep wanting to say Lazarus for some reason. I don't think it's Lazarus, but the rich man and the poor beggar died, and the poor beggar was taken into Abraham's bosom, and the rich man was sent down to hell, and he said, well, could you please have him dip his finger in water so that I could have a drop of water? And they say the gulf between you and him is too great, and you can't. And then he says, well, could I please go warn my brothers? And they say, well, no, because they have the prophets to listen to. And so it's kind of that idea of the ghost not being able to intervene is reminding me of that, and Marley being able to intervene with Scrooge is like
It's
that.
a Christmas miracle.
Yeah, that rich man asking for the opportunity to warn his brothers. Marley asked for the opportunity and it was given to him.
But why didn't anyone intervene for Marley? I mean,
Yeah.
Well,
Unless
I
they
guess-
did and he didn't listen.
Yeah.
I guess maybe this is a story, I think, that's about like one individual, and I definitely think it's a cautionary tale sort of story, right? It's supposed to make you reflect on yourself, and there's gonna be people on the outside of the story that you think, well, this isn't fair that they aren't getting this thing. So Marley is one, but there's plenty of other characters in the book that you could say, well, it's not fair that they haven't had heavenly intervention. I mean, because these ghosts are,
Well, they're
heaven-
angels.
they
They're
are.
angels. They're heavenly. They're angels that are coming to give him, to teach him what he needs to know. So
Isn't that
I
true?
guess my answer to that question, I think, would be this. I don't know why Marley didn't get the opportunity, but the reason that Scrooge got the opportunity was because Scrooge was going to listen and he was going to change.
Yeah.
If he wasn't gonna change, I don't think Marley would have come to him, and I don't think the ghosts would have come to him. I think there's the sense that they knew that he would change given this particular opportunity. And to me, that's how God works. That each of us is given the particular opportunities that will best help us. And so Marley, maybe given that same opportunity, would not have changed. And so maybe that's why he didn't get that opportunity. Or maybe, like you say, maybe he did, and he just chose not to listen, and therefore wasn't given the change. But I do think, to me, I think it's a matter of will he change? And in this case, the answer is yes, he will. And we see that, of course, at the end of the book. And my very favorite movie version of it is the musical Scrooge, and my main reason is the Toy Story. That is like my favorite my favorite change that I see in Scrooge as he's going around the toy store and he's like buying all these toys for the kids. And he's just walking around, and I need some of these, and some of these. Oh, and I've got to have a cricket bat. I've got to have a cricket bat. And then he's like, oh, and bows and arrows. I need some bows and arrows. And oh, this horse. Oh, and all those dolls. And it's
Poor
just
Doc
so
Doolittle,
excited.
These guys are crazy.
This is in a movie.
it's a one with Albert Finney from the
We're gonna have to
70s.
binge watch some.
Very
But
funny.
that's my favorite change. It's just this scene where he's this grouchy old man and he hates kids, and then all of a sudden he's in this toy store and he's just buying all the toys from the toy store, and he can't pass up a toy. Like every toy is so exciting to him.
It's got, and that's not from the book, but
No.
it's really fun.
And in this movie version, which doesn't happen in the book, he goes to Bob Cratchit's house. A lot of movie versions
Yeah.
happen to do that, right? It has a lot of emotional payback in a movie,
Right.
payoff in a movie version. But when he goes to Bob Cratchit's house in this movie, he's dressed up in a
Like
Santa
Santa
Claus
Claus.
costume, and he's coming in and giving them presents, and he says, "You don't recognize me, do you, Bob?" And Bob's like, "Yes,
Your
you're
Father Christmas."
And he pulls his beard off real fast, and the wife screams. It's pretty fun.
And then Bob's like, he has gone mad. He needs a raise. It's a great show, but I love that scene. But it is a good question, and then I think we have to ask ourselves again the same question: are we listening? Are we listening? Because each one of us has this same opportunity to change. And some of us have changed a great deal over our lives, and we're actually pretty decent people. But none of us have changed enough yet. And so I think it's important for us, and especially as this new year comes in, and as we get through this Christmas season, and we've looked at the Christ child, and we've really worshiped and thought about him and his life and the atoning sacrifice that he performed for all of us. And then as we go into this new year, thinking about, okay, what can I do differently this year to show more gratitude towards the Savior? What can I do differently this year to become more of what Jesus Christ taught me to be? And so that's my challenge for you, all of you today, is as you leave here today, think about Scrooge, and he was able to make his change pretty quickly, but that's partly because he had a lot of help. Now, I have no doubt that he's going to slip up sometimes, and he's going to be really grouchy and angry, because that's his pattern. But these ghosts have set him up with all the tools that he needs and the people that he needs in his life to help him continue to make that change.
I thought you were going to say he changed really quickly because he's in a book that's only about 4 hours long.
That's right. So as you go forward this year, though, with New Year's resolutions or goals or things you want to change, remember, you can't do it alone. None of us can change alone. We need the people around us, and the book really lays that out so well for us. And Scrooge needed those ghosts, but beyond that, he needs Fred, he needs Bob, he needs Tiny Tim. He needs the people in his life to be able to make that change.
We need the Savior, and we need our friends and family.
We need the Savior, and we need our friends and family. And if we turn to the right people, including Jesus Christ, we will make the changes that we know we need to make. But we need to follow the process. We need to follow the process. We need to identify, answer the questions that are on the change wheel to be able to ensure that we're going to move forward and not stagnate or move backwards. So, any last thoughts that anybody has?
Very good. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We're so glad you came.
Jared, I really appreciated that last question because I had not actually thought of that. So it was a really good question.
It's always bugged me.
There's
Not bugged me,
Yeah.
but it's always thought
No,
about.
I can see that. I'm gonna be thinking about that for the next probably 3 or 4 weeks.
There's a book, I haven't read it, but my mom has it, she really loves it. It's called Jacob Marley, that explores that idea, like what
Balance of that, I was
is.
thinking about that the other day.
It's by Jason Wright, who wrote The Christmas Jar, a whole bunch of other cheesy, heartwarming books. And I know a lot of people who really like it, so. But I don't know what he says about why. I just know that that's the theme of the book.
It's a really good question though, and it's a question that I sometimes have when I read the scriptures too. Oftentimes when I'm reading the Bible and I read about one person who has this really cool experience, and then I read about it, and then you're reading and that person's sibling or something and doesn't get to have that cool experience, and then has a bad experience, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
No, it's
This is fair.
How is
I
this
think
fair?
we don't
Why?
have all the stories though.
Yeah.
You know, we only have the stories
Right.
we have.
But there's also like, you know, when I was growing up, you know, I would hear stories about these, you know, young people who would receive visions from angels, or, you know, Joseph Smith, who has a vision when he's 14, and all my teachers at church would be like, oh, isn't it amazing that this young people would receive visions? And I remember laying in bed and thinking, where's my angel?
Yeah,
What's wrong
where's
with
my
me?
vision?
Why am I,
Where's my
why,
angel?
and
Where's my
what's so
vision? Yeah.
sinful about me that an angel hasn't showed up to me yet? I turned 14 and I was like, okay, so this is when I'm supposed to have an angelic vision, right? I was a very dense child too.
Stories
but-
of the saints can do that to you too. They can leave you feeling, wait a minute.
Yeah, and
What-
I
where
would
am I
say,
lacking? This is.
Well, like
everybody,
Corey
you know,
said,
it's a
what about, right,
question.
is their
Yeah.
visions, and it's like,
That's
I
true.
don't get visions, why not?
It's a question in real life, is to
Yeah.
say, you know, why do some people have certain experiences and other people have different experiences, and some people get angelic visions and some people don't? And
But
I think one of the
that
answers.
goes to the gifts of the Spirit, right? The Lord tells us that each of us is given some gifts of the Spirit, but nobody gets all the gifts of the Spirit, because God wants us each to have gifts of the Spirit so that we have to work together.
There's a line in the book, Rebecca, by Orson Scott Card.
Oh, yes.
He writes a series called The Wives of Israel, and this is about Rebecca, the wife of
Isaac.
Isaac, yes. So this was Rachel. Sorry, this was
Rachel.
no, it's Rebecca. It's Rebecca and Isaac.
Yeah, Rebecca and Isaac.
Okay, so there's a part in there where she's talking to Isaac, and Isaac is he's living in Abraham's shadow, and he says something like, well, I'm so frustrated that I don't get these really big, you know, spiritual experiences. I don't talk with God the way my father does, and you know, how am I supposed to know that and she says something along the lines of, well, when you're a really good man, the decisions you make are God's decisions, and your will is in line with his when you're a good man the way you are. And he was like, well, great, so that's just like everyday living then, and how am I supposed to know?
Isn't it? It is interesting though that, you know, we talk about the fathers, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob has a lot of really neat stories. Abraham has a lot of really neat stories. Isaac doesn't have a whole lot of really neat stories. It's like
He was almost sacrificed.
his most famous story as an adult is that
His children trick him.
is that his children trick him, and that he wants to give the birthright to the wrong child. Wait a minute here.
Yeah, right.
But yet we know we still revere him equally with Abraham and Jacob, because he is one of the patriarchs, one of the great fathers of the Israelite nation. And I think it goes back to what Rachel was saying. We don't have all the stories. We have some stories. We don't have all the stories. Someday it's gonna be amazing.
Maybe that's why you need the centerpieces.
I think
That's
about
right.
my grandma. I remember her saying towards the very end of her life, she's like, well, I've always just been a helper, I guess. Like, I wasn't a leader, I've just always been a helper. And after she passed away, it became really apparent that she had a very good influence on everyone around her, because some other family members, like, their personalities changed somewhat without her influence, and it just,
If you're a helper, you touch a lot.
yeah, it just, you know,
Yeah,
aside from
huge
just
impact.
missing her and her personality, you could see
Yeah.
the impact on the world. And I think, you know, even if we didn't have stories for Isaac, like, we could still
Oh, yeah.
that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's one of the reasons I love the fact that we have more than one story of Mary and Martha. Because so often people say, are you a Martha or are you a Mary? And that always bugs me, you know, and it's like being a Martha somehow is lesser
Right,
than
yeah,
being
yeah.
a Mary. But Martha is one of the few people who actually testified openly that Jesus was the Christ when he was alive. Only a few people actually did that. And Martha was one of them, and her testimony is one of those beautiful testimonies in the New Testament. But if we only had the one story, she wouldn't look too good.
Yeah.
True.
So I do love the fact that with her at least we have multiple stories, we get to see her in both sides.
All right, so next month's book club is the fourth Saturday. That's going to be the regular time.
Yep,
regular
fourth Saturday
schedule.
of January.
This is reading- And the book that we're reading is,
Silas Martyr
which is a
by
novel
George Eliot.
Yeah, by the great Victorian novelist George Eliot. It's a pretty short novel for a Victorian novel. And
You have to clarify that.
For a
It's a
Victorian
short
novel,
novel
it's
for a
quite short.
Victorian novel.
It actually kind of connects to a Christmas Carol in a lot of ways. It's got a miserly old man who is transformed by the love of a child, and it's a really beautiful story.
Yeah, I think you will really enjoy the story of Silas Martyr. I read this one, the first time I read this, I was a
Definitely a
freshman in high school, and I loved it. Which is not true about most of the books I was asked to read in high school. I did not like reading most of the books they asked me to read, but this is one that I really did enjoy reading. So Silas Martyr, that will be our next book, the fourth Saturday of January.
Do we have a book for February?